I'm actually very humbled tonight to be honored alongside the other honorees tonight, and somewhat intimidated, which is an unusual thing for me to be intimidated. But after listening to the Reverend Calvin Butts and then Preet and all the things that people have to say, it's an incredible group of people. And actually, I was listening to Preet share the story of Bill Browder, and I read Bill's book this summer, which goes through a similar discussion that Preet laid out. And it's really an inspirational story. But the thing that came to my mind when I was reading the book is that freedom is not free, and it can never be taken for granted. And when I think about that, that is really what I think this organization is all about, right? It's about making sure that there's the rule of law, there's transparency, there's good government to make sure that we all have our freedoms and a baseline for which to live free and wholesome lives. And that is an extraordinary mission for any organization. And so I think that is really resonated me when I was hearing Preet talk about that. I have had the honor of serving both as the vice chair of the Port Authority and at the MTA and a number of other government areas I've seen. And I would say in my tenure in those periods, I've seen the best of government and truly the worst of government. Some of my times at the Port Authority, I thought it was a little bit of a mixture of the show Scandal and Boardwalk Empire. But you survive it, and one thing that comes out is that you recognize how important good government is. Because good government's not just a concept, it affects people's lives. It affects people how, their public safety, it affects their ability to have opportunity, equality, it affects the quality of life of everyone. And when you have bad government, it sets people back. And it's even more important now in today's current environment because we live in this incredibly rapidly changing world where technology has taken the winners of yesterday and brought new winners today and turned everything upside down. And you really need to be dynamic and fluid and functional in a world that is changing that rapidly. And unfortunately, from where I sit, it feels like most of the government that I interact with is stuck in the 20th century. And one of the things that I think is critical and why it's so important for organizations like this here is to realize that the rule book of the 20th century doesn't work in the 21st century. And I always say at times like this, when you're standing still, you're moving backwards. And unfortunately, if government doesn't actually come into the 21st century, we're going to be moving backwards, not standing still. So it's critical for all of us to be focused on good government reform, taking risk on regulation, the Constitutional Convention, things that focus on change and say, if you were going to rewrite the book today, would you rewrite it how it was written 100 years ago, or would you rewrite it for what the landscape of the future holds? And I believe, and I think this organization believes, it's for what the landscape of the future holds, not was 100 years ago, and why it's so important that we push for meaningful reform and change today. The other thing I'd like to say is this, I think one of the most important quotes I've ever heard was from Justice Louis Brandeis, and he said that the most important political position is that of private citizen. And I take that very seriously, and I think everyone in this room does, that civic responsibility is key. We just can't look to our government organizations, agencies, and elected officials to have them guide the future for us and pursue change. It's incumbent upon all of us as citizens to lead the way, to have a voice, to make a change. And I think Reverend Butts said it well in many of his comments about being able to have the courage to go out and step forward and make the change. And it starts, frankly, with the most basic component. Don't just be out there marching in demonstrations. Be out there marching to the voting booths and vote, which doesn't happen. And make sure that everyone who has any capability or desire to vote, it's easy for them to vote, because that's the number one most important thing of the vibrancy and vitality of our democracy. I just want to conclude by saying, not only am I honored, but I'm actually feeling encouraged by the level of support that this organization has, because it shows how much this city has in terms of a population that cares about civic responsibility and its future, and I'm proud to be one of its Gotham leaders in that process. So thank you so much, and thank you for having me tonight.